page of The Guardian this morning is absolutely horrific. Graveyard for children. For children. Israeli airstrikes, the largest refugee camp in Gaza. 3,542 children dead. Just in the next street over there, this is where we live. In the next street over there is my daughter's primary school. There's 300 children in that school. This means that every single child in my daughter's primary school is dead, murdered, bombed. Can you imagine the reception children, year 1, year 2, year 3, 4, 5 and 6, all 300 dead. Times by 12. 12 primary schools massacred. Is that what it says? Is there really international law in the world? What does it say about killing children? What does it say about bombing refugee camps? What does international law say about that? Israel military confirms it bombed Gaza's largest refugee camp. We have received this from ActionAid. We have received the worst news possible. The Israeli bombing has killed our colleague Noah's entire family, mother, father, sisters, brother. We have no words for the grief, for the barbarity. More children have died by bombs in Gaza this month than in the entire last year across 24 wars, according to Save the Children. And the cross-party consensus, Keir Starmer, yesterday, he said no, now's not the right time for a ceasefire. There are 12 primary schools, all the children dead. Now's not the time. And that's in America. It's horrific.
This is 100 people. This is 500 people. This is 1,000 people. This entire hall is 2,400 people. This is 3,000 people. Seldom a concert hall big enough to hold 3,000 people. Fewer than the number of children killed in Gaza in 3 weeks.
And in southern Lebanon, Ben Wiedemann, who visited the Jabalia refugee camp this past May. Ben, the IDF says that there were Hamas tunnels in this camp and that they killed the senior Hamas commander. When were you last at this camp, and was a Hamas presence evident there?
I was last there in May after another round of fighting between, at that point, Islamic Jihad and Israel. And no, there was no obvious Hamas presence there. What was obvious was that this was one of the most densely populated of Gaza's 8 refugee camps. And more than anything, what you would see in Jabalia was lots of children, more than anything else. Certainly not any Hamas fighters walking around. And, you know, I've been going to Jabalia for years, going back to 1993. And what always struck me going there was how many children were there. In fact, among journalists who regularly covered Gaza, they always said, you're going to Jabalia, watch out for the kids. There's so many of them. Not hostile, not aggressive in any way. Simply, you just had to manage the children while you tried to do your work. And this is, you have that spokesman for the Israeli military talking about collateral damage. Anybody who watched the footage coming from the scene of that airstrike would have been struck by how many children were on the scene, how many dead children were being pulled out of the rubble. So perhaps there was a Hamas tunnel deep underneath the Jabalia refugee camp, but on the surface there were people, there were civilians, there were children who were struck in this. And CNN was able to speak to eyewitnesses. They talked about children pulling wounded children out of the rubble. One man who saw the strike said it felt like the end of the world.
Did you watch that? Did you see all those kids in the beginning of the video? Did you see one of those elders moving everybody out the way because they could literally feel an airstrike ready to get dropped on their head? How many innocent more civilians have to pass away? Body parts being pulled out under the rubble. That was a refugee camp. Refugee camp. Tons were dropped on their heads. Tons. Where is humanity? This is unacceptable.
Israel just bombed a refugee camp. Really big trigger warning.
Horrific blast, however, at the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza, north of Gaza City. A witness described to CNN that it, quote, felt like the end of the world, and that 7 to 8 holes, craters in the ground were filled with dead people, body parts, quote, all over the place. CNN's Nada Bashir has more on the Israeli airstrike. We want to warn our viewers that the images in this report are quite disturbing.
Horrifying scenes of utter despair. Where is she? This man pleads, but everything here is gone. Part of the Jabalia refugee camp, among the largest and most densely populated in Gaza, now turned to rubble. The latest target of Israel's relentless air campaign. The IDF has claimed responsibility for the airstrike. The target, they say, a senior Hamas commander.
What would you do if these were your children, if this was your family?
The BBC News reported that dozens of people were killed in an explosion in a northern Gaza refugee camp. And journalist Wyatt Reed says when Israel, the US, or Ukraine hit someone with a missile, it's an explosion. But any missiles fired by Palestinians or other enemies of the United States are terror attacks. Just a little lesson in how the media uses language to manipulate us, condensed into a meme.
The Israeli army, the most moral army in the world, has struck once again in its unending fight to destroy all evil the world over by bombing a refugee camp. Yeah, last night Israel allegedly dropped 6 one-ton bombs on the Jabalia refugee camp, and these are the scenes of the destruction. Now, apparently, over 100 people are dead and hundreds more have been injured by this horrific attack by the State of Israel. Now, Israel claimed that they were taking out one Hamas commander. However, this is no excuse. There is no excuse for what they did to the Jabalia refugee camp. Just look at how many people will have lost their lives because of this. Just look at the destruction of homes that have severed people's access to the basic amenities that having a home offers you, and also how much money was lost from these people who are already refugees and incredibly poor and lost the place that is their family home and all of their possessions. There is no excuse, there is no explanation, apart from the fact that Israel is a genocidal settler colony that is seeking to punish the Palestinian people and eventually ethnically cleanse and displace them from the Gaza Strip. If indiscriminately bombing civilians in hospitals, refugee camps, and in their homes is what self-defense of your settler colony looks like, then your settler colony is the problem and it must be dismantled. And I'm not talking about Jewish people being removed from historic Palestine here. What I am talking about is the de-Zionization of the Israeli state and the creation of a state that is actually able to treat all of its citizens equally rather than preferencing Jewish people both in terms of rights and their right to life over all other people because of their ethnicity.
So, remember how Israel dropped 6 tons of bombs on Jabalia refugee camp yesterday in Palestine? Well, they bombed it again today. They bombed that same refugee camp again today. Just think about it. Let's sit here quietly for a second and think about it. Israel bombed a refugee camp 2 days in a row. Not just once, but twice. Let me repeat it. They bombed a refugee camp. A camp that contains refugees and only refugees. They bombed it yesterday, 6 tons of bombs, and then they bombed it again today.